Hello, dear listener, and welcome to the fourth installment of this interview series with the historical Buddha. So far, on the Undead Sages podcast, we have been using the fiction that I'm a time traveler, visiting long dead wise people, in order to bring their life stories back to life. In the case of the Buddha, I have invited him to take on the same role and travel back with me down the pages of history, up to the present day. Seeing as his legacy has been so vast and diverse, it makes sense to ask him to reflect on how his core teaching of the Four Noble Truths has been adopted and adapted. Last week, we explored how his once orally transmitted teachings were written down in Sri Lanka. We also saw how the community of monks expanded, and how fault lines appeared along conservative and more modern interpretations of his message. The conservative faction wanted to adhere solely to the teachings as they were written down in Sri Lanka, and the commentaries based on them. So last week, we followed the surviving branch of this tradition, often known as the Way of the Elders, or Theravada. This week and the next, we'll explore the other branch, the modernists, or Mahayana. I hope you'll appreciate that a 2,000-year history can hardly be summed up in the half hour or so we have to do the interview. So, like in most previous editions of the podcast, we've had to resort to generalizations and simplifications. Also, we'll split the philosophy section off from the section where we talk about the different practice schools and how they are unique. So this week philosophy and next week the practice schools. If you feel something was missed or could have been better explained, please feel free to comment. That is the best way for me to understand whether this format is working and how it can be improved. Thank you. And now it's time to welcome back to the podcast Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha.
Thank you, Miren. It's good to talk with you again. As you can see, it remains monsoon season here in India. And so the bhikkhus and me are still on our yearly rains retreat.
What are bhikkhus, Buddha?
Bhikkhu is another term for monk. Those who have given up their homes, families and wealth and have joined the Sangha, the community of monks.
So last time, we spoke about the way your teachings have lived on after your death in the Theravada school of Buddhism, the way of the elders. Today, let's explore the other great school, the great vehicle, or Mahayana. Seeing as we're covering roughly 2,000 years of history here, yes, you are that old, Buddha. Let's first focus on the philosophical differences between the two schools. So, how do Mahayana teachings differ from the ones in the Pali Canon?
So let's start with the basics. We've talked about the Pali Canon in our previous interviews. It focuses a lot on individual liberation. It's about becoming an arahant, someone who reaches enlightenment and escapes the cycle of birth and death, samsara. Mahayana shifts the focus. It's not just about freeing yourself. It's about freeing everyone. That's the bodhisattva path. A bodhisattva delays their own final nirvana to help others. Compassion takes center stage in Mahayana.
Compassion?
In the Pali Canon, compassion is important. It's part of the path. But in Mahayana, compassion is everything. It's right up there with wisdom. The whole point of being a bodhisattva is helping others. It's not just about your liberation, it's about everyone's. Mahayana sutras like the Lotus Sutra and the Avatamsaka Sutra paint this beautiful picture of bodhisattvas who dedicate their lives to saving all beings.
You mentioned these sutras. What is the purpose of the bodhisattva ideal? Is it merely a model to direct one's will and energy towards? Or is there some deity aspect to it as well?
The primary purpose of the bodhisattva ideal is to serve as an inspiration and guide for practitioners. It represents the highest aspiration of Mahayana Buddhism to cultivate compassion, wisdom, and selflessness to such a degree that you dedicate your entire existence to helping others awaken. But the Bodhisattva ideal has symbolic qualities too. In many Mahayana traditions, images and sculptures can be found that portray a certain Bodhisattva, like Manjushri in Zen or Guanyin in Chinese Buddhism. Does that mean that Mahayana traditions get theistic, like the Abrahamic religions of the West? No. Of course, people are free to consider, even worship a Bodhisattva as a divine being, and that's fine. Their main symbolic function, however, is to portray a course of action that is fully in line with the Dhamma. Or, I really should start saying Dharma now, since most of the writings in Mahayana are no longer in Pali, the language of the Theravada texts, but in Sanskrit. The two languages are highly related though. But if you were ever wondering why karma is sometimes given as kamma, or why nibbana points to the same concept as nirvana, this is why. The Bodhisattva ideal is a constant reminder that the most compassionate, wise, or dharmic way to act is always and ever available to us. And the Bodhisattva vow is a strong part of setting a lifelong determination to hold compassion for all beings as the highest ideal.
What about your person? I imagine the founder of the movement merits some consideration. Do you get portrayed differently?
Oh, definitely. The Pali canon shows me as a historical figure, someone extraordinary but human, who wakes up to the truth and shares it. Mahayana expands on that. The Buddha becomes something cosmic, eternal. There's the Trikaya doctrine, three bodies of the Buddha. There's the Dharmakaya or ultimate truth, the Sambhogakaya, this blissful form that higher beings can connect with. And the Nirmanakaya, which is the physical body we all know, like Siddhartha Gautama. So the Buddha in Mahayana isn't just a man, he's universal.
How does that strike you?
Well, I am old and close to death, and I don't think I will be able to evade it. In fact, I've often taught that I'm just as human as you, Merin, and that my life will end at death same as yours. That the teachings are not about me. I often talk about how a bhikkhu should be unconcerned with praise and blame because those things only perpetuate suffering. Nevertheless, here too, I can see the symbolic utility in connecting my name, my person, so strongly to the teaching of liberation that it becomes universal. Theravada has made this conception of me one of the three jewels in which people take refuge in order to start walking the Eightfold Path. It also extends me to include my teachings, and thus, in a way, makes me timeless and universal as well. Although not quite to this degree of sophistication, I admit. You said yourself after my death, the Dharma survives for at least 2,500 years. If this helps keep the Dharma going, and people are still liberating themselves and practicing compassion toward others, through it, I don't see the harm.
Wow, I feel we went really deep there. Let's take a small step back. Are Mahayana teachings themselves different from the Theravada ones?
They are. The Pali Canon gives us the foundation, the Four Noble Truths, the Eightfold Path, meditation, ethics. It's straightforward and focused on practice. Mahayana adds new layers. You get emptiness, the idea that nothing has a fixed, independent existence. Everything is connected and constantly changing. There's also Buddha nature, which says that everyone has the potential to be a Buddha. It's a very hopeful message. Enlightenment is already in you, just waiting to be uncovered.
What about faith and devotion?
In the Pali Canon, it's more about confidence in the teachings and your own effort. Mahayana brings in cosmic Buddhas and Bodhisattvas like Amitabha or Avalokiteshvara who actively help people. You can call on them for support, and practices like chanting or visualization connect you to them. It's a more devotional approach and more universal in a way. The Pali Canon leans toward monastic life. Monks and nuns have the best shot at enlightenment, though lay people can work toward it too. Mahayana throws the door wide open. Anyone, monks, nuns, lay people can walk the Bodhisattva path. Enlightenment is for everyone. It is important to understand that the Pali Canon and Mahayana aren't opposites. They just have different focuses. The Pali Canon is all about the individual path to freedom. Mahayana zooms out. It's about helping everyone get free, with compassion and wisdom leading the way. Both are powerful, just in different ways.
Can you explain the idea of the open canon and how the two traditions diverge on this?
Of course, the open canon is one of the big ways Mahayana and the Pali Canon-based traditions like Theravada differ. In Theravada, the Pali Canon is considered complete and closed. It's a fixed collection of texts that's believed to preserve the original teachings. If you want to know the path, that's your source. In Mahayana, though, the canon is open. It doesn't stop with the earlier teachings. Mahayana believes teachings were given at different levels for different people, so there's a deeper layer of wisdom beyond that in the Pali canon. These later teachings are seen as just as authentic.
How do Mahayana practitioners explain those later teachings?
They see them as part of the doctrine of skillful means or upaya. The idea is that I taught what people could understand at the time, but I also taught more advanced ideas to others, like bodhisattvas or highly realized beings. These teachings were hidden or passed down until the right time. So Mahayana sees the Dharma as living and dynamic, always expanding to help people in new ways.
Why doesn't Theravada accept this?
Theravada focuses on preserving the teachings closest to the discourses I gave during my life. The Pali Canon sticks to the earliest discourses and anything outside that is considered later interpretation or commentary. They're cautious about adding texts because they want to keep the teachings as authentic as possible.
So, what's the practical impact of the open canon?
The open canon lets Mahayana adapt and grow. It adds teachings for different needs, like the Bodhisattva ideal, cosmic Buddhas, or advanced philosophy like emptiness. It's why Mahayana can take on so many forms, from Zen to Pure Land to Tibetan Buddhism. On the flip side, Theravada's closed canon offers consistency and a strong connection to the earliest teachings. Both approaches have their strengths.
I imagine that an open canon can lead to the growth of many different philosophies and practice schools. Can you explain the philosophical schools of Mahayana first, and then talk about how the practice schools developed?
Sure, let's dive in. Mahayana has two big philosophical schools that shape everything else, Madhyamaka and Yogacara.
I actually talked with Nagarjuna some time ago. It was a fascinating discussion. Can you summarize what Madhyamaka is all about?
You're right. Madhyamaka, or the middle way school, comes from Nagarjuna. It's all about emptiness, the idea that nothing exists independently or permanently. That doesn't mean things don't exist at all. It means everything is connected, constantly changing, and has no fixed self. Why does this matter? Because we suffer when we cling to things as solid or permanent. Realizing emptiness cuts through that clinging and helps you see the world as it really is, fluid, open, interconnected. Madhyamaka develops in India around the 2nd century CE. It's a time when Indian philosophy is super lively, with lots of debates between Buddhists, Hindus, and Jains. Nagarjuna takes these ideas and pushes them further, showing how emptiness isn't just a concept. It's the ultimate nature of reality.
Emptiness reminds me of your concept of not self, how selfhood isn't real, but comes from the five aggregates.
You're right that sunyata, emptiness, and anatta, not self, are closely related, but there's an important difference in scope. Let me break it down. In early Buddhism, not self is one of the three marks of existence, along with impermanence and suffering. It says there's no permanent independent self. What we call a self is just a combination of the five aggregates: form, sensation, perception, mental formations, and consciousness. For example, think of a cart. The cart isn't a thing on its own. It's just wheels, axles, and wood put together in a certain way. The self is like that. It's just the aggregates working together, but we mistake it for something solid and real. Not self helps you let go of attachment to this idea of me or mine. It's about freeing yourself from the illusion of a fixed identity.
How does emptiness expand on that?
Sunyata takes the idea of not self and applies it to everything. It says not just the self, but all phenomena, physical things, concepts, experiences, are empty of independent existence. Here's why. Everything depends on something else to exist. A tree depends on soil, sunlight, water, and time. A thought depends on your brain, experiences, and language. Nothing exists on its own, separate from causes and conditions. So while anatta focuses on the illusion of the self, Sunyata shows that this lack of inherent existence applies to all things.
Why does this matter?
Because even when people understand anatta, they might still cling to other things. You might say, okay, I don't have a permanent self, but this table is solid. Or the dharma is unchanging. Sunyata challenges that. It's not about saying things don't exist at all. It's about seeing that they exist dependently, not independently. This perspective helps you let go of attachment to anything, not just the self.
How does this show up in practice?
In Mahayana, sunyata becomes the foundation for practices like compassion and wisdom. When you see everything as interconnected and without fixed essence, you realize there's no separation between me and others. This fuels bodhisattva compassion, the drive to help all beings. It also helps you avoid extremes. You're not clinging to the idea that things are permanent, but you're also not falling into nihilism. Instead, you live with a sense of openness and flexibility.
Just to push back on this a little, didn't you already say that all of experience is constructed? Doesn't that imply not self can be extended the way Nagarjuna applies emptiness?
You're absolutely right to push back on this. It's sharp thinking. The idea of anatta can be extended to the broader view of sunyata. And in fact, Nagarjuna's work builds on the foundation laid by early Buddhism. Let me explain how they connect and where the differences still stand. The understanding of not self naturally extends to the world of experience because everything we experience, forms, thoughts, emotions, is also made up of parts and arises from causes. Early teachings like those on dependent origination, Patikka Samuppada, already hint at this interconnected nature.
So where does Nagarjuna take it further?
Nagarjuna takes the logic of dependent origination and anatta and applies it with laser focus to everything, not just the self or personal experience. His central argument is that if everything arises dependent on something else, then nothing has its own inherent existence. This is where sunyata comes in. It's not a rejection of existence, it's a rejection of independent or absolute existence. Nagarjuna's point is that things only exist because of relationships, causes, and context. That's a deeper, more universal application of the same logic used in anatta. Think of anatta as a specific teaching about the self. It helps you see that there's no fixed I because it's a construct. Sunyata, on the other hand, takes that insight and applies it universally. It's not just saying the self is empty, buddy. It's saying everything is empty. Nagarjuna also develops this in much more detail, exploring the emptiness of concepts, objects, and even the dharma itself. So while the logic of anatta leads to sunyata, sunyata is a broader philosophical framework that goes beyond the individual experience.
So the Madhyamaka teachings on emptiness are an extension of elements that were already present in your original teachings?
My teachings focus on the practical path. They aim to help people understand their suffering and work toward liberation. The focus is on how to let go of clinging to the self rather than analyzing the emptiness of the entire cosmos. Nagarjuna builds on this foundation but takes it into the realm of philosophical inquiry. His audience includes not just meditators but scholars, other Buddhist schools, and even Brahmanical philosophers. He expands anatta into sunyata as part of a larger intellectual conversation. You're absolutely right that anatta contains the seeds of sunyata. Nagarjuna doesn't reject my teachings, he deepens them. Anatta focuses on the illusion of the self. Sunyata says, let's apply that insight to everything and see the bigger picture. They're connected, but Sunyata takes the logic of anatta and dependent origination to its ultimate conclusion. It's like going from seeing one wave to understanding the whole ocean. Both are liberating, but they address different levels of understanding.
Okay, so emptiness, that's the Madhyamaka strand of philosophy. What about the other one, Yogacara?
Yogacara, or the mind-only school, comes a bit later. It focuses on the nature of the mind and how we experience reality. The big idea is that what we think of as the world isn't out there. It's a projection of our own mental processes. Yogacara explains how karma, habits, and perceptions shape samsara. It gives you a roadmap for how the mind works and how to transform it. This school is big on meditation, using insight to break free from old patterns. It develops around the 4th century CE and complements Madhyamaka. While Madhyamaka focuses on the emptiness of things, Yogacara looks at the mechanics of how we experience that emptiness through the mind. Together, they give Mahayana its philosophical depth.
Can you say more about Yogacara? It sounds fascinating.
It doesn't mean the world is unreal, it means our perception of the world is always filtered through mental processes. Think of it this way: when you see a tree, what you actually experience is your mind's interpretation of that tree, its color, shape, and so on. You don't experience the tree directly. This means your experience of reality is shaped entirely by your consciousness. The mind is the root of both samsara and liberation. All suffering, craving, and attachment arise in the mind. By understanding how the mind works, you can transform it and free yourself. Yogachara explains this using the concept of the three natures, Trisvabhava. An unawakened person generally perceives the first of these three natures, the imaginary nature. This is when we project things that aren't real, like mistaking a rope for a snake or believing in a fixed self. When someone wakes up, they move from perceiving the imaginary nature to seeing a phenomenon's dependent nature. This is the interconnected reality of causes and conditions, where everything arises dependent on everything else, like the tree that arises dependent on the soil, sunlight, rain, and time. This perception then opens the way to seeing that phenomenon's perfected nature. This is seeing things as they truly are, free from projections and misinterpretations. Through practice, you move from the imaginary to the perfected by experientially understanding the dependent nature of all things.
That almost sounds like I can get awakened by simply reading the right book, telling me how things work. But surely that is not enough. How does Yogacara explain karma and habit?
Yogacara introduces the concept of the storehouse consciousness. In Sanskrit, this is called alaya vijnana. It's like a vast, subconscious reservoir that holds all your karmic seeds, impressions left by past actions and thoughts. These seeds influence how you perceive and react to the world. For example, if you've cultivated anger in the past, that seed might sprout as an angry reaction when conditions arise. The goal of Yogacara practice is to purify this storehouse, replacing unwholesome seeds with wholesome ones. When the storehouse is fully purified, it transforms into wisdom and liberation becomes possible. This aligns with the idea that as a person, you're always practicing something, even when you are not aware of it. You're always cultivating some of the seeds in the storehouse consciousness over others. That's a key insight in Yogacara. Whether or not you're aware of it, you're constantly planting, watering, and cultivating seeds in the storehouse consciousness. Every thought, word, and action feeds into this process.
That sounds kind of vague. I can't see, feel, or eat this storehouse consciousness. What does it mean in practice?
It means you're never neutral. Your mind is like a garden, it's always growing something. If you're not consciously cultivating wholesome qualities like kindness, patience, or mindfulness, then unwholesome seeds like greed, anger, or delusion might sprout instead. For example, imagine you're stuck in traffic. If you let irritation and impatience take over, you're watering the seeds of anger. But if you consciously choose patience, you're nurturing seeds of calm and understanding. Over time, those wholesome seeds grow stronger and unwholesome ones weaken.
Does this happen even when I'm not trying to practice?
Yes, the storehouse consciousness is always active, even when you're not aware of it. Habits, emotions, and reactions, these are all seeds sprouting based on past cultivation. For example, if you've spent years practicing compassion, it becomes second nature to respond kindly. But if you've fed seeds of jealousy or resentment, those might sprout without any conscious effort. This is why mindfulness is so important. By becoming aware of your thoughts and actions, you can stop reinforcing unwholesome seeds and start cultivating wholesome ones.
How does this relate to liberation?
Liberation in Yogacara comes when the storehouse consciousness is purified. That means unwholesome seeds are uprooted and only seeds of wisdom and compassion remain. When this happens, the storehouse transforms into a kind of mirror-like wisdom, reflecting reality as it truly is, without distortion. This doesn't mean you stop thinking or feeling. It means your mind becomes naturally attuned to wholesome, skillful responses. You see clearly without clinging or aversion.
So, is it all about conscious practice?
Conscious practice is crucial, but it's not the whole story. Even small, seemingly automatic actions, how you treat a stranger, how you respond to frustration, are part of this process. Over time, these repeated actions shape your mental landscape. Yogacara encourages you to make your practice continuous. Even when you're doing ordinary things like eating or walking, you can cultivate mindfulness and gratitude. Every moment is an opportunity to tend your garden. Whether you realize it or not, you're always practicing something. You're always feeding certain seeds in the storehouse consciousness. Yogacara teaches you to become aware of this process and take responsibility for it. It provides a detailed map for meditation and practice. It explains how to work with the mind, understand its patterns, and dissolve the dualistic way we usually see the world. This constant me versus other mindset. For example, a key practice is mindfulness of mental processes. By observing how thoughts and perceptions arise, you can begin to see their constructed nature. This helps you let go of attachment and see reality more clearly. By choosing mindfulness, kindness, and wisdom, you can transform your mental patterns, purify your storehouse, and move toward liberation. It's a gradual process, but every moment is a chance to take a step forward.
What's the ultimate goal of Yogacara?
The goal is to understand the mind so deeply that you see through all illusions and dualities. When the mind is free of projections, it becomes clear, like a still lake reflecting the sky. This is the state of liberation, free from suffering, clinging, and ignorance. Yogacara is a profound path offering insight into how we create our reality and how we can uncreate the patterns that bind us. It's a beautiful teaching grounded in wisdom and compassion.
How does Yogacara connect to emptiness?
They complement each other. While emptiness emphasizes that nothing has inherent existence, Yogacara focuses on how the mind creates the illusion of a solid, independent world. Together, they help you understand both the absence of essence and the workings of perception. It also ties into Buddha nature. Yogacara teaches that beneath the layers of mental construction lies the potential for awakening, the luminous, untainted nature of mind.
Okay, so now we have to talk about Buddha nature.
In some ways, just like emptiness, what's been termed Buddha nature was already implicit within my earliest teachings. After all, why would I have bothered spending my entire life teaching and developing the Dharma if people didn't have the capacity for enlightenment? One of the Dharma's axioms is that people can awaken. Buddha nature is the idea that all beings, every single one of us, already have the potential for enlightenment. At the deepest level, your mind is pure, luminous, and fully capable of awakening. The idea is that awakening isn't something you add, it's something you uncover. Buddha nature means the seed or essence of Buddhahood is already within you. It's like a jewel covered in mud. Right now, your true nature is obscured by ignorance, craving, and aversion, but it's still there. The practice is about clearing away those obstacles so your Buddha nature can shine through.
How does it relate to other teachings like emptiness?
This is where it gets interesting. At first, Buddha nature might seem like the opposite of emptiness, sunyata. Emptiness teaches that nothing has inherent existence, while Buddha nature might sound like some eternal essence inside you. But they're not contradictory. They complement each other. Here's how. Buddha nature is empty of inherent self but full of potential. It's not a thing you can hold on to. Instead, it's a way of describing the mind's capacity for awakening. You could say Buddha nature is emptiness seen as infinite possibility.
Why is Buddha nature important?
Buddha nature is a deeply encouraging teaching. It tells you that no matter how lost or stuck you feel, you're never truly cut off from awakening. This idea is especially important in Mahayana's Bodhisattva path. It reminds you that all beings, not just monks or meditators, have the potential for enlightenment. It's why the Bodhisattva vows to save everyone, because everyone already has this innate Buddha nature. Theravada teachings sometimes seem to imply that awakening is incredibly difficult, something requiring lifetimes of effort or even limited to certain people like monastics. Buddha nature teachings respond by saying, no, everyone has the seed of Buddhahood. Enlightenment isn't something far away or reserved for a select few. It's already within you, waiting to be realized. This democratizes awakening and aligns with Mahayana's emphasis on universal liberation.
How do you realize Buddha nature?
The path to realizing Buddha nature is about removing obscurations. Practices like meditation, ethical conduct, and wisdom help you see through the layers of craving, ignorance, and false self. In Yogacara terms, once again, it's about purifying the storehouse consciousness. In emptiness teachings, it's about letting go of clinging to concepts. Either way, the goal is the same: to uncover the luminous awakened mind that's already present.
Does this mean everyone is guaranteed to become a Buddha?
Not automatically, the potential is there, but it requires effort and practice to realize it. Buddha nature is like fertile soil. You have to plant the right seeds and tend to them carefully. Without practice, the potential remains dormant. That said, Buddha nature gives hope. It reminds you that awakening isn't something foreign or impossible. It's your natural state waiting to be revealed. In the end, Buddha nature is an invitation. It says, you're already whole. Now uncover it.
What is non-duality, and how does it connect to Mahayana practice?
Non-duality, Advaya in Sanskrit, is a central concept in many Mahayana schools, particularly those influenced by Madhyamaka, Yogacara, and Zen. It's the insight that the apparent dualities we perceive, self and other, subject and object, samsara and nirvana, are ultimately false distinctions. Non-duality points to the realization that reality isn't divided into separate, independent entities. Our ordinary minds tend to split the world into pairs of opposites: me and you, good and bad, existence and non-existence, etc. These distinctions feel real, but they arise from mental habits and conceptual thinking. Non-duality doesn't mean collapsing everything into a single undifferentiated blob. Instead, it reveals that the seeming boundaries between things are constructed. When you see this directly, you realize that all phenomena are interconnected and interdependent, without fixed identities or separations.
How does this connect to the philosophies we talked about?
Non-duality is deeply rooted in core Mahayana concepts like emptiness and dependent origination. Dualities like existence, non-existence, or samsara and nirvana arise because of conceptual thinking. When you see through these constructs, you realize that samsara and nirvana are not two separate realities. They're just different ways of perceiving the same dependent, empty nature. Yogacara focuses on how the mind creates the illusion of subject and object. Non-duality here is about seeing through this illusion and recognizing that the division between observer and observed is just a mental projection. It's important to understand that non-duality isn't a theoretical idea. It's a direct realization that comes through practice.
You mentioned Zen earlier.
In Chan and its Japanese counterpart Zen, non-duality is central to both philosophy and practice. Zen teachings often emphasize the non-duality of everyday life and awakening. For example, when you're washing the dishes, there's no separation between you and the act of washing. It's just one seamless reality. Zen koans challenge dualistic thinking by presenting paradoxes like, what is your original phase before you were born? These questions aren't meant to be answered intellectually, but to break through conceptual dualities. Zen's focus on direct experience aligns perfectly with the insight of non-duality. Instead of analyzing or debating it, you realize it by seeing through the false distinctions your mind imposes.
How does this impact practice?
Non-duality transforms how you relate to the world. When you no longer see yourself as separate from others, compassion arises naturally. You help others not because they're other, but because their suffering and liberation are not separate from your own. It also shifts your view of samsara and nirvana. Instead of striving to escape samsara, you realize that nirvana is already present when you see samsara clearly. This insight dissolves the push-pull dynamic of clinging and aversion, leading to a profound sense of peace and freedom.
Isn't this hard to grasp?
Yes, because our minds are conditioned to think in dualities. It's how we navigate the world. But non-duality isn't something you grasp intellectually. It's something you experience directly through meditation and insight. Many Mahayana schools use skillful means to point to non-duality. Whether it's Madhyamaka's deconstruction of concepts, Yogacara's analysis of the mind, or Zen's focus on direct experience, the goal is the same: to help you see beyond dualistic thinking.
Thank you once again, Buddha, for this enlightening discussion. Next time, we'll discuss the Mahayana practice schools in more depth.
Sounds good, Meren. It's fascinating to me to learn about all the future developments, how rich the Dharma becomes.
And thank you for listening. Tune in next week for the 5th installment of our conversation with Siddhartha Gautama. In the meantime, if you enjoyed this episode of the Undead Sages podcast, please like, share, and subscribe.